The biting cold of the morning invaded the busy streets of New York, and amid the hustle and bustle, a man walked with his head down, wearing a food delivery uniform. Nobody noticed his presence. To most, he was just another worker, struggling to survive the exhausting routine of the city. But behind that worn-out cap, a secret was hidden. He was a millionaire, a man accustomed to luxury and power. That day, however, his mission was completely different. He had decided to disguise himself as a delivery man to understand firsthand the difficulties faced by people in more vulnerable positions. He wanted to experience firsthand the prejudice and inequality that many face on a daily basis. Before continuing with this exciting story, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and comment from which city you're watching. Your participation is essential so that stories like this continue to be told. Share your reflections and stay until the end, as the outcome of this narrative will bring an unexpected lesson that you cannot miss. He adjusted the hood over his head as he quickly walked to his bike. It was a busy morning, and the delivery orders kept coming. But his destination at that moment was a luxury building in the heart of the city, a place frequented by influential and powerful figures. Despite being in a privileged position in life, at that time, he was seen as a simple worker, and that was exactly what he wanted. Arriving at the building, he was stopped at the entrance. The security guard, a burly man with a cold expression, gave him a look of contempt. "Where do you think you're going?" asked the security guard, without disguising his arrogance. The delivery man patiently lifted the bag of food and calmly replied, "I have a delivery for Mr. Hampton on the roof." But his response was met with more scorn. "People like you don't go up this entrance. Go to the back," said the security guard, pointing to a hidden side entrance intended for service personnel. The delivery man took a deep breath. For a moment he almost responded in kind, but decided to remain calm. That was exactly the kind of situation he wanted to experience. The humiliation, the prejudice, the way people are treated simply because of their appearance or occupation. As he made his way to the back entrance, he reflected on how many times other workers had experienced similar or worse situations. As he waited for the service elevator, more challenges arose. The look of contempt from the other employees, the way no one recognized him as anything other than a simple delivery man. For them, he was invisible, and that said a lot about the way society saw those people who were outside the sphere of power. However, the delivery man maintained his composure. He had a greater goal in mind, and each insult was another step towards his true lesson. When he finally arrived at the penthouse, he was greeted by a butler who looked him up and down before picking up the delivery. "You're late," said the butler, without hiding his irritation. The delivery man politely apologized, even though he knew traffic had caused the delay. He was already used to this type of reaction. But little did the butler, the security guard, and all those who disrespected him know that the man they were belittling was not just a delivery man, but someone with far more power than they could ever imagine. As he descended in the service elevator, yet another once heading to the streets, the delivery man reflected on the coldness and indifference with which he had been treated. He who always drove luxury cars, who went to the most expensive restaurants, was now living on the opposite side of the coin, and it affected him. It was a different feeling, but necessary. His mission to understand the reality of the people who worked to keep the city running was clear. He wanted to see up close how prejudice manifested itself, and, more importantly, how he could use his power and influence to change that reality. The figure of the delivery man, whose real name was Darnell Williams, contrasted sharply with his true identity. An African-American born in a humble New York neighborhood, Darnell had built his empire from scratch. Years of hard work, smart investments, and strategic vision have led him to become one of the most influential business people in the United States. However, he never forgot his origins, nor the difficulties he faced throughout his life. He grew up amid injustice, seeing his parents and friends being underestimated because of their color and social class. And now, with all the wealth and power he had gained, he wanted to do something to change that. That experience as a delivery man was not just a curiosity, it was part of a bigger plan. Darnell was looking for answers about how the working classes were treated, especially people of color and minorities, in a system that clearly marginalized them. His days undercover were being carefully documented by his secret team, who he had positioned at strategic points to capture the interactions he would have with people from different social strata. Every look of contempt, every word of arrogance would later be used in his social justice initiative, a campaign he planned to launch to reform the country's labor and racial equality laws. Outside the luxury building, Darnell climbed onto his delivery bike, still feeling the weight of previous interactions. He cycled through the busy streets of Manhattan, taking in the life around him. The hurried workers, the amazed tourists, and of course, the countless delivery people who, like him at that moment, did their work invisible to the majority. Every corner represented a new reflection on how life for many was marked by constant efforts and little recognition. As he pedaled, the antagonist character of this story began to take shape. John Smithers, the manager of a large restaurant chain, was known for his arrogance and callousness. Smithers was someone who strongly believed in social hierarchy and made a point of treating anyone he considered inferior with complete disdain. For him, workers like delivery drivers were just disposable parts of a machine he controlled. There was no respect, no empathy, just profit. And it was exactly on the next delivery that Darnell would have a direct confrontation with Smithers. Arriving at the restaurant he managed, Darnell prepared for another simple delivery. However, the manager, upon seeing the black man in the delivery uniform, decided to publicly humiliate him. "It's late, as always," Smithers said in a loud tone, attracting the attention of customers and employees. "You delivery people are all the same, without education, without commitment. That's why you'll never leave this life," continued the manager, making a point of showing his supposed superiority. Darnell, once again, took a deep breath. He knew that responding at that moment could compromise his mission. Even though he wanted to expose his true identity and confront the manager, he remained calm. He took the order and left without saying a word. But that interaction, although painful, would be a fundamental piece of what was to come. As Darnell walked away, his thoughts focused on the next step in his plan. The humiliation he had just suffered would be reversed in ways Smithers could never have imagined. And soon, the arrogant manager would understand that power and money are not always visible at first glance. Darnell continued his journey as a delivery man, delving deeper and deeper into the harsh reality faced by millions of workers who, like him at that moment, were devalued daily. With each new order, he came across different types of customers, from those who just ignored him to those who treated him with explicit contempt. The world around him seemed to operate based on a cycle of indifference, where people like him, who were part of the invisible service, were little more than numbers to many. However, he knew that this cycle needed to be broken, and he was increasingly determined to be the agent of this change. The confrontation with John Smithers, the restaurant manager, was a defining moment in his experience. The arrogance and contempt with which Smithers treated everyone around him, especially those in positions he considered inferior, revealed a deep-rooted system of prejudice and elitism. For Darnell, this behavior was nothing new. He had seen it throughout his life, from his childhood in a marginalized neighborhood to his rise as one of the richest men in the country. However, experiencing this humiliation firsthand as a delivery man brought a new layer of understanding. Smithers continued to act disdainfully, not imagining who the man he had just humiliated really was. To him, Darnell was no different than any other delivery man who passed by. And it is at this point that the real conflict begins to intensify. Darnell, while working as a delivery man, began observing patterns of behavior at the restaurant. He noticed how Smithers treated employees with the same arrogance and coldness, and how those who needed the job submitted to humiliating treatment, having no other option. It was a vicious cycle of abuse of power and inequality. But Darnell wasn't just there to observe, he was gathering information and setting the stage for a turnaround that Smithers would never have imagined. Behind the scenes, Darnell's team worked to record every interaction, documenting every insult, every display of prejudice. The goal was clear: create a solid case that exposed not just Smithers, but the system that allowed people like him to prosper while oppressing others. The conflict deepened as Darnell witnessed more abuse. One night, while he was waiting to pick up another order, he saw a restaurant employee being publicly humiliated by Smithers. The young man, a waiter who appeared to be in his first few days on the job, made a simple mistake while taking a customer's order. Smithers, instead of handling the situation with understanding or guidance, made a point of yelling at the boy in front of everyone. The waiter was visibly shaken, his hands shaking as he tried to correct the mistake, and Smithers just smiled dismissively. Darnell observed everything, and it made him remember his own trajectory. How many times during his youth had he been underestimated? How many times had he been treated as if he had no value because of his color or social status? He knew that that scene was a constant reality for many, and that was exactly what he wanted to change. With each new insult Smithers hurled, Darnell felt his resolve grow. Darnell's team, who were in strategic locations throughout the restaurant, recorded Smithers' every word and every gesture. And the turning point was getting closer and closer. Darnell knew he couldn't act impulsively. He needed to be calculated, patient, and wait for the right moment to reveal his true identity and, more importantly, his true intentions. His experience as a black man and millionaire disguised as a delivery man was about to culminate in a plan that would shake the power structures of that restaurant and perhaps the entire service sector. Smithers, for his part, remained blind to what was to come. In his mind, he was untouchable. His abusive behavior had no consequences, as no one dared to stand up to him. He controlled his employees through fear, believing that money and status put him in a position of absolute power. Little did he know that Darnell, the man he had humiliated, was the real power in that situation. Tension increased with each interaction between Darnell and Smithers. The humiliations became increasingly personal, and Darnell, even though he maintained his calm demeanor, felt his anger growing. But he would not give in to impulsiveness. His plan required patience and precision, and he was determined to see it through to the end, whatever the cost. Smithers, however, was about to have his perception of power completely shaken. The final confrontation between the two was near, and Darnell knew that when the moment came, the lesson he would bring would be as unexpected as it was transformative. As Darnell continued his undercover mission, he began to realize that Smithers' restaurant was just one piece in a larger game of inequality and abuse. The subplot involving the restaurant employees brought to light the profound impact that Smithers' behavior had on the lives of those around him. Darnell noticed how some of the older employees, who had become accustomed to the hostile environment, accepted humiliation as an inevitable part of the job. They barely looked Smithers in the eye and did as he told them without contesting. One of these employees, named Ricardo, was an experienced cook who had worked at the restaurant for over 15 years. Despite his skills and loyalty, he had never received a promotion or recognition. Smithers treated him as if he were disposable, completely ignoring his years of dedication. Ricardo, who had a family to support, endured the humiliation in silence without ever complaining. For Darnell, Ricardo represented the many invisible workers who supported the structure of businesses like that restaurant, but who were constantly neglected. Ricardo's story was intertwined with Darnell's mission to expose injustices there. Another subplot involved a waitress named Paula, who had recently been hired and was still adapting to the restaurant's intense routine. Unlike Ricardo, Paula was not willing to accept Smithers' abusive treatment without a fight. She often spoke up when she saw injustice at work, which in turn put her in uncomfortable situations with her manager. Paula was the opposite of Ricardo in terms of reacting to the abuse, but they were both trapped in the same system. She knew that at some point she would be forced to choose between her job and her dignity. This duality between the employees, those who accepted and those who resisted, created an interesting dynamic that enriched the main plot. The relationship between Paula and Ricardo offered a counterpoint to Darnell's central conflict with Smithers. While Darnell had the financial freedom to confront Smithers without fear of losing his livelihood, the other employees did not have that option. Darnell saw in Paula's resistance and Ricardo's resignation an opportunity to explore the different forms of oppression in the workplace, and how, regardless of individual reactions, everyone was somehow caught in an invisible trap. In addition, another subplot related to the customers who frequented the restaurant emerged. Some of them, regular customers, were aware of the way Smithers treated his employees, but did nothing to change the situation. The local elite, who frequented the restaurant because of their status, were also involved in the cycle of abuse, whether through direct action, such as when they disrespected employees, or through inaction, when they ignored what was happening around them. This added layer of complexity revealed that the problem was not just with Smithers, but with a much broader system of inequality and collusion. Darnell, in his deliveries, began to create connections with some of these customers, disguising himself as a helpful and friendly delivery man. He heard their conversations, their complaints about the services, but he also noticed how condescending and indifferent to the reality of those working behind the scenes. It was frustrating to see how these people seemed completely disconnected from the reality of the people who depended on working in that restaurant to survive. However, this only strengthened his resolve to create change. Darnell used these interactions to gather even more information. He was preparing to build a case that would not only affect Smithers, but also expose the hypocrisy of an entire elite who benefited from the invisible work of people like Ricardo, Paula, and himself, while undercover. The subplots wove a web of complexities that deepened the narrative, revealing the breadth of systemic problems that Darnell intended to address. It was no longer just about an abusive manager, but about an entire society that perpetuated these inequalities. Meanwhile, Darnell was increasingly aware of the impact his revelation could have. He knew it wasn't enough to just expose Smithers. The lesson he wanted to teach needed to be bigger, something that would reverberate not only in the restaurant, but throughout the community. Paula and Ricardo symbolized the extremes of what he wanted to change. On the one hand, resistance, and on the other, resigned acceptance. Darnell's mission was to ensure that in the end, they both saw that there was a better way, and that the system didn't need to stay that way. The story's turning point comes on a particularly busy night at the restaurant, when a big event for the local elite takes place. It was programmed. The restaurant was full of important city figures, people of power and influence, and Smithers was visibly stressed by the responsibility of maintaining order and ensuring everything ran smoothly. He became even more aggressive and harsh with the employees, especially Ricardo and Paula, demanding perfection and threatening them with dismissal for every small mistake. Darnell, still disguised as a delivery man, was watching everything closely. He had already gathered enough information to expose the restaurant and Smithers' behavior, but he knew he needed a key moment to make the revelation have maximum impact. He watched as Smithers pressured employees while high society customers remained indifferent to the abuse. The atmosphere was saturated with tension, and Darnell knew it was only a matter of time before something critical happened. It was in this scenario that Paula made a small mistake. While serving one of the most influential customers at the event, she accidentally spilled some wine on the table. Smithers' reaction was immediate and brutal. He, who was already on the verge of collapsing from the stress of the night, exploded in a public display of humiliation. He yelled at Paula in front of everyone, calling her incompetent and demanding that she leave immediately. Customers watched in silence, some visibly uncomfortable, but no one dared to intervene. Paula, embarrassed and with tears in her eyes, started to leave, but something inside her broke. She stopped and, for the first time, faced Smithers. In a moment of courage, she told him that she would no longer accept being treated that way, not by him or anyone else. Her voice shook, but there was a firmness that silenced the restaurant. All eyes were on that scene. Smithers, furious at Paula's insolence, tried to intimidate her further by telling her that she would never get a job anywhere else in town again, that he would make sure of that. It was at that moment that Darnell decided it was time to act. He got up from the table where he was disguised as a delivery man and, to everyone's surprise, began to speak. Darnell calmly and firmly revealed his true identity to Smithers and everyone present in the restaurant. He introduced himself as Darnell Hughes, the millionaire who had secretly invested in several companies in the city and who now intended to transform Smithers' restaurant. The impact of his words was immediate. Silence took over the place, and Smithers was completely stunned. Darnell explained that his initial intention in disguising himself as a delivery man was to understand the internal dynamics of the restaurant and see how employees were treated. What he had discovered was much worse than he had expected. He not only witnessed Smithers' cruelty, but also realized how the city's elite connived at that type of behavior. While directly addressing the customers in attendance, Darnell confronted them about the fact that by doing nothing, they were complicit in the abuse taking place in that restaurant. Darnell's revelation came as a shock, especially to Smithers, who was now visibly pale and speechless. The irony of the whole situation was stark. The man he had humiliated and disdained for being just a delivery man was, in fact, the investor who could decide the fate of his restaurant. But Smithers' public humiliation wasn't enough for Darnell. He wanted more than just to expose injustice. He wanted to ensure change happened. Darnell then announced, to everyone's astonishment, that he had decided to buy the majority stake in the restaurant. From that moment on, not only would he be the new owner, but he would make significant changes to the management and treatment of employees. He looked directly at Paula and Ricardo, ensuring that under his leadership, the restaurant would become a place where hard work would be valued and respect would be a priority. Smithers tried to fight back, arguing that this was an abuse of power, but Darnell quickly silenced him, reminding him that he had documented all the abusive conduct he had witnessed over the past few weeks. Darnell made it clear that if he wanted to, he could sue Smithers and ruin his reputation forever, but he opted for a different solution: Smithers' immediate firing and his removal from control of the restaurant. The turning point reached its peak when Darnell made sure everyone in the restaurant witnessed the change. He made it clear that Smithers' example would not be tolerated in any workplace under his management. His lesson for everyone present was simple: respect and dignity in the workplace are not privileges, but rights. And he, with his influence and power, would make sure that message was heard. After the initial shock of Darnell's revelation, the restaurant was filled with dense silence. No one knew exactly how to react to that unexpected situation. Customers, accustomed to privilege and preferential treatment, felt uncomfortable, and many avoided making eye contact with Darnell, as if their failure to recognize the situation sooner made them guilty too. Others seemed surprised, not by Smithers' abusive behavior, but by Darnell's audacity in exposing everything in such a public way. Smithers, on the other hand, was in an absolute state of shock. He tried to assimilate what had just happened, but his pride prevented him from fully accepting reality. Instead of apologizing or acknowledging his mistakes, he tried to maintain a facade of authority. He stood up, looked at the customers, and still in his firm voice said that this was a setup, that Darnell was just using his money to publicly humiliate him. But upon hearing this, the eyes in the restaurant turned no longer to Darnell, but to Smithers. It was clear that at that moment, no one was on his side anymore. The restaurant employees, who had endured the humiliation and toxic environment for so long, watched the scene with a mixture of relief and hesitation. They knew that this change could mean a new era for them, but they were also aware of the possible repercussions. Paula, in particular, was the one who felt the weight of the turnaround the most. She had stood her ground against Smithers, and now it looked like all her hard work would finally pay off. However, there was a mix of emotions, as she knew that change is not always easy, and she didn't know what to expect from now on. Darnell, upon noticing the reaction of Smithers and the customers, remained calm and imposing. He knew that this was a golden opportunity, not only to transform the restaurant, but to leave a clear message to everyone there. He looked at Smithers and, with the same calmness with which he exposed his true identity, replied, "This place deserves better than a manager who humiliates and intimidates his employees. I'm not here to humiliate you, Smithers. I'm here to ensure that respect is the new standard." The clients, now realizing that the situation was not a simple dispute between two powerful men, began to question their own role in that dynamic. After all, how many times had they witnessed Smithers treating employees badly and simply ignored it? That night was a reflection of something much bigger, something that directly touched on the way society treated those who were considered inferior. And Darnell, with his position of power and influence, had shed light on this issue in an undeniable way. The news of Darnell's purchase of the restaurant spread quickly, and within days the place became the center of attention in the city. Newspapers, social networks and blogs began to comment on the event, highlighting Darnell's courage in confronting a deep-rooted system of abuse. Many applauded his attitude, seeing him as an example of leadership that the business world should follow. Others, especially those who were accustomed to benefiting from power structures like Smithers, were critical of Darnell's presentation of the situation. Paula and Ricardo, in turn, became symbols of this change. Darnell made a point of promoting them and ensuring they had more of a voice in running the restaurant. Paula, who had been publicly humiliated, was now seen as a figure of resistance and resilience, inspiring other employees to speak out against injustice in the workplace. However, not everyone accepted the change peacefully. Some employees, especially those closest to Smithers, decided to leave the restaurant, arguing that the new management was not what they expected. Darnell, however, was unfazed. He knew that transformations of this type always face resistance, and he was prepared to deal with adversity. For Smithers, the consequences were even harsher. Without a job and with his reputation destroyed, he found himself isolated, rejected by those who once respected him. His name became synonymous with abuse of power, and he ended up withdrawing from public life out of shame and lack of options. Darnell, on the other hand, emerged as a transformative leader, someone who not only talked about justice but implemented it in practical ways. Darnell knew that true change required more than just a moment of justice. The purchase of the restaurant and the firing of Smithers were just the first step on a long and arduous path. He wasn't interested in just doing a symbolic act. His goal was to ensure that the restaurant became an example of a fair, welcoming and productive work environment. So he began to reformulate the restaurant's internal structure, listening to employees, understanding their concerns, and establishing new guidelines. One of Darnell's first initiatives was to create a horizontal management system where all employees would have the chance to participate in important decisions. Paula, who now held a prominent management position, was the first to notice the difference. She was no longer a simple employee, but a true leader with an active voice and responsibility. Under Darnell's guidance, she learned to not only manage, but to inspire others. Paula began to realize that the role she played in the restaurant now transcended the old role of waiting tables. She was a bridge between the team and the new management, someone who could really make a difference. Ricardo, who had always remained discreet and observant, also felt the impact of the new administration. He was always dedicated and attentive, but he never imagined he would have the chance to grow within the restaurant. With Darnell in charge, Ricardo was asked to take a more active role in the kitchen, helping to revise menus and modernize dishes. This new opportunity challenged him in ways he never imagined. In addition to developing his culinary skills, he had to learn how to deal with the business side of running a restaurant, something completely new to him. However, with the support of Paula and Darnell, he grew and became more confident. Darnell knew that the restaurant's growth didn't just depend on internal change. He started investing in training and qualifications for the entire team. It brought in consultants specializing in customer service, conflict management, and even diversity and inclusion. The idea was to create a space where everyone, from the waiter to the chef, felt part of something bigger, a true team united by a common purpose, offering the best possible experience for customers while ensuring a healthy and respectful work environment. But this transformation was not easy. Some employees, accustomed to the old Smithers regime, had difficulty adapting to the new reality. Some questioned the changes and even resisted them, believing that things were better when there was a clear and rigid hierarchy. However, Darnell knew that resistance was part of the transformation process. He didn't try to force anyone to accept the new norms, but he also didn't deviate from his vision. Those who did not adjust ended up deciding to follow other paths. On the other hand, most employees embraced the changes. They began to realize that they were being treated as valuable human beings and not just as disposable cogs in a corporate machine. Over time, the restaurant began to flourish. Customer reviews have improved dramatically. The welcoming atmosphere and quality of service became highlights. Customers weren't just coming for the refreshed menu, but for the warm service and positive atmosphere emanating from the staff. As the restaurant grew, Darnell didn't forget the message he wanted to convey. He wanted his experience to serve as an example for other companies, not just in the food sector, but in all segments. He began giving lectures on ethical leadership and social responsibility. His transformation story was widely shared on social media and at conferences, and soon other entrepreneurs began seeking advice from him on how to transform their own businesses. Paula and Ricardo, now with central roles in the restaurant, also actively participated in these lectures. They shared their personal experiences, showing that, with the right leadership and the right environment, any employee can grow and become a fundamental pillar of a company. What was once just a temporary job had now become a meaningful career. Throughout this process, Darnell also experienced personal growth. He always knew he had the financial power to change things, but learning to connect with people on a deeper level was a valuable lesson. He realized that his true wealth was not in the money he had, but in his ability to positively impact the lives of those around him. This journey made him see that the greatest victory was not in the public humiliation of Smithers, but in building something lasting and beneficial for everyone. The restaurant, now under new management, has become an example of overcoming and transformation, not only for the employees, but for the entire community. Darnell, Paula, and Ricardo were no longer just owners and managers of a restaurant. They were agents of change, showing that with empathy, determination, and a clear vision, it was possible to transform even the most toxic environments into places of growth and collaboration. As the restaurant grew in popularity, the team began to notice a significant increase in competition. New establishments were popping up, all trying to capture the public's attention and, more importantly, the approval of Darnell and his team. Yet amid this growth and flourishing, Darnell worried about something deeper, the possibility that the culture he had created could be threatened by this new market pressure. He knew that the reputation they had built depended not only on a good menu and service, but also on maintaining the essence that made the place special. To ensure everyone on the team remained focused on the restaurant's vision, Darnell called a meeting, It was an opportunity for everyone to feel heard and engaged. He wanted them to share their ideas on how to keep the environment positive and welcoming despite the growing competition. The room was full, and he carefully observed his employees' expressions. He knew many were anxious, but he wanted them to feel like they were part of a team. During the meeting, some brilliant suggestions began to emerge. Paula proposed the idea of a community event that would celebrate the cultural diversity of the neighborhood, inviting residents to bring typical dishes to share. She believed this would not only increase the restaurant's visibility, but also strengthen ties to the community. The idea generated enthusiasm among the team, and voices of support echoed around the room. Ricardo, in turn, suggested a series of cooking workshops where customers could learn how to make dishes from the menu. This would not only provide new revenue stream, but also strengthen the connection between customers and staff, making the restaurant experience even more memorable. With these ideas, the atmosphere of the meeting changed. Positive energy reigned, and everyone began to get excited about the prospect of an event that would celebrate local culture and bring the team even closer together. Darnell knew they were heading in the right direction. He made a point of praising each contribution, reinforcing that they were all essential to the success of the restaurant. However, as the ideas solidified, Darnell also remembered a challenge that could threaten everything they had built: Smithers. He'd stayed out of the spotlight since his dismissal, but the possibility of a comeback could not be ruled out. Darnell decided that before implementing the new initiatives, he needed to prepare for any eventuality involving Smithers. An informal conversation with the restaurant's lawyer brought up troubling information. Smithers had plans to open a new restaurant, and he was determined to get revenge on Darnell, even more so now that he was out of his position of power. Darnell began to realize that it wasn't just about maintaining a successful restaurant, but about ensuring that the culture they had built was protected. He decided he needed to act. Instead of being paralyzed by fear of competition, he and his team dedicated themselves to creating a brand that was truly unique and stood out from the crowd. They came together to plan the community event, which was named the Festival of Gastronomic Diversity. The objective was to celebrate local cuisine and culture, as well as strengthening ties between residents and the restaurant. As the festival approached, Darnell was also concerned about ensuring that employees were prepared for any negative reactions from Smithers or his new allies. He promoted training sessions on how to deal with criticism and adverse situations. He knew the team needed to be united and strong, no matter what might happen. As a result, the team not only became more cohesive, but also began to cultivate a new resilience in the face of adversity. With the festival quickly approaching, the anticipation and excitement were palpable. The employees were preparing for a day of celebration, and the movement in the kitchen was frantic. However, Darnell knew the pressure was mounting and that Smithers' presence could be a reality. He had a plan in mind. If Smithers tried to sabotage the festival, Darnell was determined to face him with dignity and courage. Not only did he want to protect the restaurant and the staff, but he also wanted to show the community that they were stronger together. He began to cultivate a positive mindset among employees, reminding everyone that success didn't just come from beating the competition, but from staying true to the values they had promoted from the beginning. So as the day of the festival approached, Darnell felt a mixture of anxiety and optimism. He knew the event would be a pivotal moment, not just for the restaurant, but for his community. The atmosphere was vibrant, and the team was closer than ever, eager to show everyone that the restaurant was not just a place to eat, but a true home for each of them. The big day of the Festival of Gastronomic Diversity has finally arrived. The restaurant was filled with colors, delicious aromas, and a palpable excitement in the air. Tables were set up outdoors, decorated with flags and vibrant flowers, and the sound of live music resounded, attracting the attention of neighborhood residents. Darnell looked around with a mix of pride and nervousness. He knew this event was more than just a celebration. It was an affirmation of what his restaurant stood for and a reminder that the community was united. As the afternoon progressed, the crowd grew. Residents of all ages gathered to taste typical dishes brought by local cooks, while restaurant staff worked hard to serve and interact with guests. The event was going incredibly well, and Darnell felt like his dream of creating a welcoming, inclusive space was coming to fruition. However, as he greeted visitors, a shiver ran down his spine as he saw a familiar figure approach. Smithers. With a disdainful look and a sardonic smile, he walked towards the restaurant, surrounded by some supporters. The tension in the air was palpable, and Darnell immediately alerted his team. He knew that Smithers had a history of sabotage and couldn't let his presence ruin the event that meant so much to everyone. "Stay calm, everyone," Darnell said, rallying the team. "If he comes with bad intentions, we must stay focused and strong. This festival is ours, and we cannot allow anyone to take that away from us." With that, the team rallied around him, reaffirming their determination to maintain the positive spirit of the festival no matter what. When Smithers finally reached Darnell, the atmosphere became tense. "So, Darnell, do you think you can be the community's big hero now?" Smithers snapped with a cocky grin. "I can guarantee your little party won't last long." His intention was clear. He wanted to destabilize Darnell and divert attention from the event. Darnell remained calm. "We are here to celebrate the diversity and unity of our community. What you do or say will not change that." He spoke firmly but without hostility, knowing this was the best way to not give Smithers the satisfaction of causing a scene. At this moment, the surrounding crowd began to gather, attracted by the tense conversation. The murmur of voices grew as more people came closer to listen. Darnell realized this was the perfect opportunity to show the community the true essence of the restaurant and its values. "Look at all of us here today," Darnell began, raising his voice so everyone could hear. "We are coming together not just to eat, but to celebrate who we are. Every dish here represents our culture, our stories, and our togetherness." He gestured to the variety of dishes displayed on the tables, reminding everyone that diversity was the force that united them. The crowd began to applaud, and the atmosphere quickly changed. People began shouting words of support, remembering the positive impact the restaurant had on their lives. Darnell felt a surge of emotion when he saw that the community was behind him, and the feeling of solidarity overcame any attempt to destabilize Smithers. "This place is more than a restaurant. It's a home, a family," Darnell continued, his eyes shining with passion, "and we're not going to let anyone come here and try to divide us." Darnell's words reverberated through the crowd, and he realized that while Smithers was trying to destabilize him, he was losing control of the situation. Smithers, realizing he was isolating himself, tried to change tactics. He began criticizing the event, insinuating that people were just there to have fun and not to enjoy the food. But the crowd, now clearly on Darnell's side, began to respond enthusiastically, countering Smithers' words and defending the importance of the festival. Darnell saw that the tension was about to reach a critical point. In a moment of inspiration, he decided to do something unexpected. "If you really care about the community, why don't you join us, Smithers? Come, try the dishes and join the celebration." The invitation was unexpected, and everyone was silent, waiting for Smithers' response. Surprisingly, Smithers hesitated. The crowd was waiting for a reaction, and he realized there was no way to get out of that situation without losing face. He looked at Darnell, then at the crowd, and finally at the plates of food. The pressure was on him, and he didn't want to appear weak in front of the community. The festival wasn't just about food, it was about love, unity, and respect. And in that moment, Darnell had turned a potential confrontation into an opportunity for reconciliation, challenging Smithers to reconsider his behavior. The crowd began to applaud, and Darnell knew he had done the right thing. In the heat of the moment, Smithers, realizing that his strategy was failing, turned and walked away, defeated. The crowd erupted in applause, and Darnell felt that not only had he protected his restaurant, but he had also strengthened his bond with the community. The festival continued in full swing, with everyone celebrating together, leaving Smithers' sabotage attempt behind. With the festival in full swing, Darnell breathed a sigh of relief. The support and unity of the community filled him with hope and joy. He knew the event was a milestone, not just for his restaurant, but for everyone there. As guests danced, smiled, and shared stories around the tables, Darnell was convinced that endurance and perseverance were truly worth it. In the late afternoon, as the sun set, creating a colorful and vibrant sky, Darnell took to the small makeshift stage, now filled with lights and decorations. He demanded everyone's attention, his heart pulsing with excitement. "I want to thank each and every one of you for being here today and for supporting not only our restaurant, but the idea that we are all part of the same community." Warmly applauded, Darnell continued, "This festival was a fight for inclusion and respect. I thank the local cooks, artists, and everyone who contributed to making this event possible. Together, we are showing that diversity is a strength, not a weakness." At that moment, one of his old school friends, Miguel, approached the stage with a guitar. He prepared to play a song he had composed, a song that celebrated unity and diversity. Miguel started playing, and the soft and engaging melody immediately attracted everyone's attention. The crowd began to sing along, and the atmosphere was filled with joy and camaraderie. As the music blared, Darnell watched the smiling faces, raised hands, and hugs exchanged among those present. It was a magical moment, and he knew that this was the true essence of what he had sought when opening his restaurant. He was creating a space where people felt welcomed, valued, and respected. When the song ended, Darnell saw an opportunity to take it a step further. He seized on the moment of positive energy and said, "Today, we not only celebrate our culture, but we also make a commitment. Let's work together to ensure our community continues to thrive and grow in inclusivity. My restaurant will always be an open space for everyone, and I invite each of you to join me in this effort." The crowd gave a standing ovation, and many shouted words of support. The festival, which was once just a food event, was now turning into a movement. People began to come together in small groups, discussing ways to continue promoting diversity and inclusion in their daily lives. Darnell came down from the stage and began interacting with the guests, listening to their stories and sharing experiences. He realized that many of them were as inspired as he was. Some people suggested ideas for future events, while others offered help promoting the restaurant and community initiatives. In this atmosphere of camaraderie, a young man approached Darnell. He was a teenager named Lucas who had fought against prejudice at his school. "What you did today was incredible. You inspired me to fight for what's right," Lucas said, his eyes shining. "I want to help create a group at school to promote diversity. Can I count on you to help me organize it?" Darnell smiled, feeling a surge of pride. "Of course, Lucas. I'm here to support any effort that helps our community. Let's make it happen together." The connection he made with the young man was a reminder that his work was beyond the restaurant. It was an opportunity to impact the next generation. As night fell, the festival lights twinkled like stars. The restaurant was full of laughter, stories, and renewed hope. Darnell realized he had found his true mission, not just to feed people, but also to nurture a sense of belonging and togetherness. As the festival drew to a close, Darnell took the stage again, thanking everyone for their presence and support. He announced that from that day forward, the restaurant would hold a monthly event that would celebrate diversity, including nights of food from different cultures and discussions about social issues. "The future is ours, and together we can make it better," he proclaimed with determination. "If each of us does our part, we can turn our community into an example for everyone." People began to disperse, but the spirit of celebration continued. Darnell saw Smithers walk away, but this time he felt no anger or sadness. Instead, he felt empowered. What really mattered was the way the community had come together and supported each other. At the end of the day, as Darnell closed the restaurant, he felt a wave of satisfaction. He had faced challenges, but the reward was priceless. Through adversity, he found strength and purpose, not just for himself, but for everyone around him. That night, as he looked up at the stars, Darnell smiled, knowing that the fight for inclusion and respect was just beginning, and he was ready to lead that journey. Months later, Darnell's restaurant has become a symbol of inclusion in the community. The monthly event attracted people from all backgrounds, promoting diversity and cultural celebration. Lucas, now a leader at his school, organized a diversity club that inspired other students to come together for a more welcoming environment. Darnell looked around his packed restaurant and smiled, knowing his fight had made a lasting impact. As a new group of customers walked in, he realized that real change had begun, not just in his heart, but in the entire community. If you've made it this far, leave your thoughts on Darnell's story in the comments. Comment "I watched until the end," and don't forget to share this video with your friends. Your interaction is very important to us and helps spread this message of empathy and inclusion. If you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any new exciting stories. And of course, click on the video that appears on the final screen to continue diving into narratives that touch the heart.